On this Thursday night, an agreement on a path to a new pipeline. The ambitious agenda Canada's Prime Minister and Alberta's Premier have signed on to.
This is a really great day for Albertans.
This is Canada working.
And the familiar roadblocks.
No proponent, no route, no money, no First Nation support.
Plus, the federal cabinet minister who's now resigning. The aftermath of Hong Kong's deadly high-rise inferno and the evidence of negligence. And the Afghan national accused of shooting 2 National Guardsmen in Washington, D.C.
We must now re-examine every single alien who has entered our country from Afghanistan.
Plus, a history of a mystery, the exhibit dedicated to fiction's greatest detective and his connection to Montreal.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We begin with a sweeping plan to build a new oil pipeline from Alberta to the BC coast.
Hi, Prime Minister.
How are you doing? It's great to see you.
It's so nice to see you.
It looked like Christmas came early for Alberta's Premier as she welcomed Prime Minister Mark Carney, the two promising their plan will position Canada as an energy superpower.
Is going to unleash an incredible amount of investment and allow us to work together on important nation-building projects.
That's going to make Canada stronger, more independent, more resilient, more sustainable. And it's all done in a spirit of cooperation, partnership, and trust.
It is not a guarantee a pipeline will be built. It's a memorandum of understanding, a first step to create the necessary conditions. The project proposal, including finding a company willing to build it, has to be completed by July 1st of 2026. And there are many obstacles in its path from BC and from First Nations. And today, the former federal Environment Minister, Guilbeault, resigned from cabinet after the pipeline plan was unveiled. David Akin is following all the developments for us tonight. David.
Well, Donna, in short, Alberta is getting its best chance yet at a new oil pipeline. Ottawa is getting its best chance at meaningful reductions to harmful greenhouse gas emissions. And both sides think what they're doing here will create more than 40,000 new jobs and add more than $16 billion a year to the national economy.
It's a great day for Alberta. It's a great day for Canada.
Canada's Prime Minister and Alberta's Premier Danielle Smith were all smiles as they signed what Smith has described as a grand bargain. Alberta, for its part, will unfreeze its cap on the industrial carbon tax and let it rise over time. Alberta will cut methane emissions by 75% and will backstop a massive carbon capture and storage project that will make Alberta's energy and electricity sector carbon neutral by 2050. For that, Canada agrees to help Alberta put together a winning proposal for a new oil pipeline to be co-owned by Indigenous partners. Ottawa will forego capping oil and gas emissions. It will let Alberta ignore federal clean electricity regulations. And if the pipeline gets built, Ottawa will allow exceptions to the North BC coast tanker ban.
This is Alberta's moment of opportunity. Our opportunity to show the nation, as well as the entire world, that resource development and emissions reduction can not only coexist, but can actually complement one another for the benefit of billions of people around the world.
Alberta is promising substantial financial benefits to British Columbia and will begin immediate consultations with BC's government. Those could be difficult talks.
I will always defend BC's interests, and defending BC's interests includes defending the oil tanker ban that has been there through multiple generations of politicians and political parties for good reason. An oil tanker spill would decimate a way of life for people in the northwest of our province.
The MOU does not contain a veto, but I think that we both recognize jointly that there is a requirement for consultation, and indeed we believe that there's an imperative for Indigenous ownership.
We look at this as the start of a process. We've created some of the necessary conditions for this to happen, but there's a lot more work to do.
And late today, Donna, after all this unfolded in the West, the Prime Minister learned there was a political cost to this MOU with Alberta. Mark Carney's Minister of Canadian Identity and Heritage, Guilbeault, he's the Montreal MP, very popular Montreal MP. He's a former Environment Minister, former Greenpeace campaigner. He quit his cabinet post in protest. Donna.
David, could Guilbeault's decision spark more dissent within the Prime Minister's ranks?
Well, this is the proverbial we shall see. We do know that some Liberals were anxious about the move. Clearly, Guilbeault was one of them. And Guilbeault says he will stay on as an MP, and that's important in a minority parliament where every single vote counts. But Guilbeault quit for all the reasons you would think that a former Greenpeace campaigner would not like this deal. He opposes lifting the tanker ban, he opposes suspending those clean electricity regulations, and he says BC and First Nations should have been consulted before any of this was all done. Now, all of that said, Carney did say today that the pipeline will not proceed unless there is a private sector proponent. And so far, there is no private sector proponent. Donna.
David Akin in Ottawa, thanks. In a statement late today, Prime Minister Carney thanked Stephen Guilbeault, saying, "I have been deeply grateful for his counsel and contributions." And he said a climate strategy based solely on regulations and prohibitions will not achieve our climate objective, not least because it will fail to generate the alignment of interests required for this historic undertaking. The coastal First Nations who live along what could be the pipeline's path in northern BC were quick to respond today, calling this memorandum of understanding nothing more than a pipe dream. Indigenous groups are required to be consulted, but in Alberta's oil and gas industry, news that some of the federal roadblocks to building a pipeline would be lifted is the news they wanted to hear. Heather Yorks-West has been gathering reaction for us. Heather.
Donna, while this MOU contains some of the federal concessions the oil and gas industry has long been calling for, there are plenty of contingencies, not the least of which involve getting Indigenous opponents on side. It was an announcement that had a room full of Alberta energy heavyweights on their feet, optimistic about attracting new investors, including one willing to build a new West Coast pipeline for the first time in almost a decade.
Before, we said there was regulatory frameworks that were in our way and they weren't signaling anything good for investors. And I think now, as you heard the Premier say, 7 of the 9 bad laws that she said have been negotiated on, and I think that's a really positive signal.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you.
Across town, thousands of members of Calgary's business community lined up to hear details from the Prime Minister himself.
Canada will also take steps to enable the export of bitumen to Asia, including adjusting the so-called tanker ban, if necessary.
But what received applause in Calgary is being met with anger on the BC coast.
Today's MOU does nothing to improve the chances of a North Coast pipeline ever becoming reality. Coastal First Nations, along with the province of BC, will do everything in our power to protect our coast from a real threat of an oil spill.
While the federal government will have the final say on a potential project, the MOU states that a new pipeline would be co-owned by an Indigenous partner.
For the First Nations here in Alberta, it's an opportunity for us to be involved in some kind of economic venture that will be long-lasting for our communities.
Now, it's worth noting that when the Trudeau government purchased the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion back in 2018, there was talk right away of having an Indigenous group take on partial ownership eventually. But 7 years later, we haven't seen that happen. Donna?
Heather Yorks-West in Calgary, thank you. In Hong Kong, the death toll in that inferno that ripped through 7 high-rise apartment buildings keeps growing. At least 94 people are now confirmed to have died and hundreds are still unaccounted for. Investigators have raided the offices of the company hired to renovate the buildings, which were shrouded in bamboo scaffolding. Redmond Shannon reports.
This is video of what appears to be the early stages of the fire at the base of one of the towers. Firefighters almost powerless as flames raced up the scaffolding and debris rained down. On Thursday, the fires were mostly under control. But the true extent of the tragedy is far from clear. The death toll is rising every few hours. Dozens have been rescued, including a man in a stairwell, but it's thought hundreds may still be missing. 3 new distress calls came from the building on Thursday.
We are trying our best and we will not give up any chance to pick up to save life.
A man listens to a voice note from a trapped loved one. He says she may have succumbed to smoke inhalation shortly afterwards. This woman says her daughter and husband are still inside. Longtime resident Mrs. Wan is among those who escaped. She says everything she owns is gone. Hong Kong Chief Executive John Lee says the construction industry will have to phase out the use of traditional bamboo scaffolding. Police have arrested 2 executives and a contractor at the firm that had been renovating the towers. Investigators say they have reason to believe the company was grossly negligent, citing the alleged use of flammable mesh, plastic sheeting and styrofoam.
It's maybe one of the cause to cause the fire and the spread of the fire so quickly.
Some residents claim fire alarms had been deactivated during the renovation work. As Hong Kong grieves, anger rises about just how this could happen in one of the world's richest cities. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
One of the 2 National Guards shot near the White House in Washington Wednesday has died, according to President Trump. The FBI has identified the man accused of shooting them. He's a 29-year-old Afghan national who had worked alongside the CIA in Afghanistan and had entered the United States legally. The motive remains unclear, but as Eric Sorensen reports, the Trump administration has already begun a sweeping re-examination of immigrants from 19 countries.
One of 2 National Guard members gunned down in Washington Wednesday has passed away. 20-year-old Sarah Beckstrom died from the wounds she suffered. 24-year-old Andrew Wolf remains in critical condition in hospital. The attack with a handgun came without warning.
One guardsman is struck, goes down, and then the shooter leans over and strikes the guardsman again. Another guardsman is struck several times.
The assailant was then shot and wounded by other National Guard soldiers. He's been identified as 29-year-old Rahmanullah Lakanwal. He lived in Washington State with his wife and 5 children and drove cross-country to D.C. He had worked with the CIA in Afghanistan. Local Afghans helped U.S. troops for years. When the war ended, some 77,000 Afghans who would have been targets of the Taliban were allowed into the U.S. by President Biden.
The disastrous withdrawal from the Biden administration and the failure to vet in any way, shape, or form, this individual and countless others.
It was a chaotic withdrawal in 2021 when U.S. troops pulled out and many Afghans wanted to be taken with them.
Not enough time to be able to establish a track record to show that you actually were pro-American.
But the nonprofit group that helped relocate Afghans says they were carefully vetted.
The Afghans who came to the United States were vetted. We're one of the most exhaustively vetted immigrant populations in this nation's history. It is painting with too broad a brush an entire nationality based on the actions of one individual.
Investigators are reportedly searching the suspect's apartment, looking for a motive or evidence of the involvement of others. The U.S. president has already concluded the threat goes beyond one individual.
We must now re-examine every single alien who has entered our country from Afghanistan under Biden.
Trump is deploying an additional 500 National Guard members in D.C. Critics say the National Guard deployment itself has heightened the so-called threat environment in the United States. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
Legislation limiting public prayer and the wearing of religious symbols. Coming up, the proposed additions to Quebec's secularism laws and why critics say it's a step too far. Quebec is taking another step in reshaping its controversial secularism laws. The province unveiled new legislation that imposes sweeping restrictions on public prayer and expands who can be barred from wearing religious attire while preemptively invoking the notwithstanding clause. Supporters call it a push for state neutrality. Critics say it targets minorities and distracts from bigger issues. Mike Armstrong explains.
Madame la Présidente, il me fait plaisir de déposer le projet de loi 9.
Quebec's secularism minister is calling his new bill a moderate effort to push greater social cohesion. To do that, he's proposing new rules, things like banning prayer rooms at universities. The province was too accommodating, he says, allowing rooms like this one at Concordia.
We went too far, and people in Quebec said, really? We want this?
Among the new measures, the bill would ban daycare workers from wearing religious symbols like a hijab, though those in the system already would have their rights grandfathered. Public funding of religious private schools would be phased out over 3 years if they select students or staff based on religion, and anyone visiting a school would be required to have their face uncovered, including, for example, a parent with a face covering at a parent-teacher meeting.
They will have to remove it.
Now, the minister is quick to point out the new rules will apply to everyone, regardless of religion. But Muslim groups say some of the rules, like banning face coverings, specifically target them, and others, like banning prayer rooms, will just make daily life more difficult.
What problem are we actually solving? Nobody said that this was an issue.
The Catholic bishops of Quebec are calling the proposed bill a radical infringement on the rights and freedoms of Quebecers. They say they are convinced that the state of Quebec must be secular and that it already is.
Pour moi, c'est de la provocation.
Well, the government admits it's tightening the rules partly in reaction to what it calls a provocation by a Muslim group. Protesters who've prayed regularly on the street in front of the Basilica in Old Montreal. Well, the bill bans group prayers in public spaces if they don't have permission from the municipality. It also invokes the notwithstanding clause in advance, protecting it from court challenges under the charter. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Montreal.
Ahead, he fled the war in Ukraine and is now balancing life in Canada with hope for peace back at home. Russian President Vladimir Putin is hardening his stance ahead of U.S.-led peace talks, insisting Russia will only lay down arms if Ukrainian forces withdraw from all territories Russia's military has taken over. If they don't withdraw, Putin says, we'll achieve this by force of arms. It is the first time the Russian president publicly addressed a newly revised peace plan, which he said could be the basis for an agreement to end the war. For many Ukrainians forced to flee their country, the latest peace talks have been an emotional roller coaster. Heidi Petrachik spoke to one of the thousands of Ukrainians now living in Canada about the latest attempt at peace and whether it feels any different from the ones before.
My family, my friends are still there.
Dari Bodnar worries about family and friends in Ukraine. When he first came here 3 years ago, it was hard to let go.
My mind lives in Ukraine. Meanwhile, me living here, going to high school, just trying to do regular things, didn't work well for me.
The resurfaced talk of finally ending the war brings feelings of déjà vu and worry about what it could mean for his country.
President Trump and his administration, they act very isolationist, and they have their own plans in their minds, which is understandable, but the cost of it are lives.
U.S. President Donald Trump's vow to broker peace in Ukraine remains unrealized. American officials heading to Kyiv and Moscow next week to push an updated deal crafted by officials from Ukraine, Europe, and the U.S. after Trump's initial 28-point plan was widely panned as too favorable to the Kremlin.
If we have a plan which started at 28, now it's down to 19 or whatever, that would actually commit the Americans to something a little more specific. That could be a gain for Ukraine, but they're not there yet.
Войска Украины уйдут из занимаемых ими территорий.
Thursday, Russian President Vladimir Putin said while the updated proposal could be a starting point, unless Ukraine withdraws, he said, quote, we will achieve this by force of arms.
We can't allow aggressor states to just decide they want to change their neighbors' borders.
The Ukrainian-Canadian Congress urging NATO allies to get tougher with more sanctions against Russia.
Pressure needs to be applied to Russia. All the pressure seems to be applied to Ukraine at this point for them to, withdraw, surrender, and give up.
If Ukraine troops step back from the fortified region, Ukraine's gone.
Which is why Bodnar says a deal can't give up ground and needs a guarantee of future peace so he can maybe one day return to Ukraine. Heidi Petrachik, Global News, Lower Sackville, Nova Scotia.
When you think of Sherlock Holmes, you might think of London, England. Well, we'll tell you about a new exhibit that highlights his connection to Canada. That's next. Sherlock Holmes was created by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle over a century ago and flawlessly portrayed on screen by Benedict Cumberbatch a decade ago. But today, if you want to test your sleuthing skills, you have to go no further than Montreal. Phil Carpenter shows us the world of history's greatest detective with a surprising Montreal connection.
Mystery, suspense, and plenty of history define an exhibition that just opened at the Pointe-Claire Museum in Old Montreal.
I'm loving the way they have set it up for the audience just to experience something personalized.
The exhibition is about Sherlock Holmes and the character's creator, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. It explores a character's world in the 19th century, things that inspired Doyle. We also learned something about the man himself.
So we have his writing desk, and it's a beautiful object, and it's the first time that the desk is presented in North America, so it's really special.
There are also other objects from his estate, like his pen and his inkwell. Throughout the displays, there are several references to the stories, but much of the exhibition focuses on history.
How they tie it into the history of the cities, the developments at the time.
And the technical revolutions that Doyle introduces in his novels.
That Sherlock Holmes uses to solve mystery, so the development of ballistic, botany, photography.
What's unique in the Montreal exhibition, though, is the story of this city at the turn of the 20th century and the parallels of what was happening across the Atlantic.
So Montreal at that time, just like in London, the population was increasing. A lot of technical innovation were happening, like a train. Montreal port was a really busy place.
With that population growth came a rise in crime, which meant police had to develop new investigation techniques, just like what happened in London. In Montreal, that led to the creation of the Montreal Detective Bureau. The show also covers Doyle's trip to Canada in the early 1900s, which included stops in Montreal.
Sherlock Holmes was read here in Montreal because Sherlock Holmes was translated really, really fast.
And this exhibition could generate even more fans of the timeless character before it ends March 8th. Phil Carpenter, Global News, Montreal.
That is Global National for this Thursday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Air Canada showcases a home in Cowansville, Quebec, the Hall in Kaleli, Saskatchewan, and the view of Moose Mountain from the top of Prairie Mountain near Kananaskis, Alberta. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next week. Bye-bye.